It is important that you should have opinions of your own on this subject. Never forget that the old law of the natural philosophers, that nature abhors a vacuum, is true of the human head. There is no such thing as an empty head, though there are heads so impervious to new ideas that they are for all mental purposes solid, like billiard balls. I know that you have not that sort of head, because if you had, you would not be reading this book. Therefore, I warn you that if you leave the smallest corner of your head vacant for a moment, other people's opinions will rush in from all quarters, from advertisements, from newspapers, from books and pamphlets, from gossip, from political speeches, from plays and pictures, and you will add, from this book. Well, of course, I do not deny it when I urge you to think for yourself, as all our nurses and mothers and schoolmistresses do, even though they cloud our heads the moment our conclusions differ from theirs. I do not mean that you should shut your eyes to everyone else's opinions. I myself, though I am by way of being a professional thinker, have to content myself with second-hand opinions on a great many most important subjects on which I can neither form an opinion of my own nor criticize the opinions I take from others. I take the opinion of the Astronomer Royal as to when it is 12 o'clock, and if I am in a strange town, I take the opinion of the first person I meet in the street as to the way to the railway station. If I go to law, I have to consent to the absurd but necessary dogma that the king can do no wrong. Otherwise, trains would be no use to me, and lawsuits could never be finally settled. We should never arrive anywhere or do anything if we did not believe what we were told by people who ought to know better than ourselves, and agree to stand by certain dogmas of the infallibility of authorities whom we nevertheless know to be fallible. Thus, on most subjects, we are forced by our ignorance to proceed with closed minds in spite of all exhortations to think boldly for ourselves and be, above all things, original. St. Paul, a rash and not very deep man, as his contempt for women shows, cried, "Prove all things, hold fast that which is good." He forgot that it is quite impossible for one woman to prove all things. She has not the time, even if she had the knowledge. For a busy woman, there are no open questions. Everything is settled except the weather, and even that is settled enough for her to buy the right clothes for summer and winter. Why then did St. Paul give a counsel which he must have known to be impracticable if he ever thought about it for 5 minutes? The explanation is that the settled questions are never really settled, because the answers to them are never complete and final truth. We make laws and institutions because we cannot live in society without them. We cannot make perfect institutions because we are not perfect ourselves. Even if we could make perfect institutions, we could not make eternal and universal ones because the conditions change, and the laws and institutions that work well with 50 enclosed nuns in a convent would be impossible in a nation of 40 million people at large. So we have to do the best we can at the moment, leaving posterity free to do better if we can. When we have made our laws in this makeshift way, the questions that concern us settled for the moment only. And in politics, the moment may be 12 months or 1200 years, a mere breathing space or a whole epoch. Consequently, there come crises in history when questions that have been closed for centuries suddenly yawn wide open. It was in the teeth of one of these terrible yawns that St. Paul cried that there are no closed questions, that we must think out everything for ourselves all over again. In his Jewish world, nothing was more sacred than the law of Moses, and nothing more indispensable than the rite of circumcision. All law and all religion seemed to depend on them. Yet St. Paul had to ask the Jews to throw over the law of Moses for the contrary law of Christ, declaring that circumcision did not matter, as it was baptism that was essential to salvation. How could he help preaching the open mind and the inner light as against all laws and institutions whatever? You're now in the position of the congregations of St. Paul. We are all in it today. A question that has been practically closed for a whole epoch. The question of the distribution of wealth and the nature of property has suddenly yawned wide open before us, and we all have to open our closed minds accordingly. When I say that it has opened suddenly, I'm not forgetting that it never has been closed completely for thoughtful people whose business it was to criticize institutions. Hundreds of years before St. Paul was born, prophets crying in the wilderness had protested against the abominations that were rampant under the Mosaic law and prophesied the Savior who would redeem us from its inhumanity. I am not forgetting either that for hundreds of years past our own prophets, whom we call poets or philosophers or divines, have been protesting against the division of the nation into rich and poor, idle and overworked. But there comes finally a moment at which the question that has been kept ajar only by persecuted prophets for a few disciples springs wide open for everybody. And the persecuted prophets with their tiny congregations of cranks grow suddenly into formidable parliamentary oppositions which presently become powerful governments. Langland and Latimer and Sir Thomas More, John Bunyan and George Fox, Goldsmith and Crabbe and Shelley, Carlyle and Ruskin and Morris, with many brave and faithful preachers in the churches and out of them, of whom you have never heard, were our English prophets. They kept the question open for those who had some spark of their inspiration. But Prozac every day. Women and men paid no attention until, within my lifetime and yours, quite suddenly, ordinary politicians sitting on the front benches of the House of Commons and aboard the European legislatures, with vast and rapidly growing bodies of ordinary respectable voters behind them, began clamoring that the existing distribution of wealth is so anomalous, monstrous, ridiculous, and unbearably mischievous that it must be radically changed if civilization is to be saved from the wreck to which all the older civilizations we know of were brought by this very evil. That is why you must approach the question as an unsettled one, with your mind as open as you can get it. And it is from my own experience in dealing with such questions that I strongly advise you not to wait for a ready-made answer from me or anyone else, but to try first to solve the problem for yourself in your own way. For even if you solve it all wrong, you will become not only intensely interested in it, but much better able to understand and appreciate the right solution when it comes along.